So way back when I was in high school, my mom and I had talked about taking a trip down to Belize. Ultimately, we ended up not being able to take that trip because my mom was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's B-cell lymphoma that was in her brain and passed away about 4 months later. Since then, Belize has kind of been in the background of my mind as somewhere I would like to go someday, and this year I decided, what the heck, why not? I made it, y'all. Belize is a small country in Central America that's wedged kind of between the bottom of the Yucatan and the side of Guatemala. It's technically part of Central America, but it is also considered to be part of the Caribbean. And up until fairly recently, it was actually a British colony. It's just a very interesting, diverse country with a lot of different cultures all kind of feeding into each other. In ancient times, it was part of the Mayan Empire, and there are still ancient Mayan ruins all across the country that you can go visit today. And with this trip, I also did something I've never done before and joined a guided group tour with Intrepid Tours. I chose Intrepid because their itinerary focused more on the historical sites and beach time and not so much the adventure aspect. So this was my 8-day adventure in Belize with Intrepid Tours. It turned out that the most chaotic part of the trip was the flight to get there. The first leg of my trip went fine. I made it to Dallas on time. I ran through the whole terminal to get to my gate on time, and we boarded the plane and we were all ready to go. And they taxied us like out toward the runway and then stopped in the middle of the tarmac. And we just sat there for like an hour, just kind of like, what's going on? Captain finally came on the speaker system and explained that there were some technical difficulties with the airplane's air conditioner, and they were having a maintenance person come out to check on it. And I mean, it was a little hot sitting there on the airplane, but I just assumed that was because we were in a giant metal tube sitting in direct sunlight. I guess like way back in the back of the plane, people were like really uncomfortable. It was like dangerously hot all the way in the back. An airport official came on our plane with a thermometer and was like testing the temperature. And then a few minutes later, our captain came back on and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I am so sorry, we're gonna have to disembark you." So we taxi back to the gate, we all get off the plane, and we sit. They eventually came to us and said, this plane is taking way too long, so we're actually moving you to a whole different plane. So then all of us have to like grab all of our stuff and move to a whole different terminal to get on a whole different plane. And then we finally board our plane, and then we sit there again. And a few minutes later, our pilot comes on, he says, "Ladies and gentlemen, I am so sorry." And I was just like, again? What is it this time? He says, "This plane, as it was coming in from its previous flight, hit a bird. So we have to wait for maintenance to clear us again." At this point, we're like 3.5, 4 hours late. The tour's welcome dinner was at 6 p.m. and it was already like 4 p.m. and we weren't even off the ground yet. Everything ended up being fine. The airport transfer people were notified that I would be late. He was waiting outside with a sign. It all worked out really well. And then when we got to the hotel, another taxi pulled up alongside us. Turned out one of the other girls on my tour was also on that flight. It became the running joke throughout the whole tour. From there on, most of the trip went pretty smoothly. We went to check in and our guide David came out to meet us. David is a Belize local. He lives out in San Ignacio, which is actually one of the places that we went to on the tour. He's very proud of his country. He's very knowledgeable about the history of his country and very enthusiastic about sharing his country with tourists like me. Honestly, I think I got really lucky with my first ever group tour. There were about 6 of us. We're all ladies and we're all about the same age. We had a really good group dynamic and it made the trip a lot of fun. We were supposed to leave at 8 a.m. on Sunday morning. It ended up being more like 8:30 because there were some technical difficulties. We finally headed off for our first stop at Lamanai Archaeological Reserve. There is a road that you can take that's like really bumpy and rough, and we're not going to do that. The main way that tourists get there is by taking a motorboat from Orange Walk, which is in northern Belize. David had arranged for us to take this tour with Colin from Lamanai Eco Tours. We started at the speedboat dock, all got into the boat. Colin took us on this ride through the New River. The ride to Lamanai took longer than the ride back because we kept stopping to look at the natural flora and fauna. We saw a lot of birds that are native to that region. There was a baby alligator at one point. I, the person who does not like boats, had a really great time, didn't have any trouble with seasickness. Once at Lamanai, Colin began showing us around. The site has a museum, including a model of a typical Mayan house. The name Lamanai is Mayan for submerged crocodile, and the site was the longest continually inhabited Mayan city from about 1500 BC to the 17th century AD. They also allow you to climb up some of the ruins at Lamanai, which a lot of other archaeological sites like that no longer allow you to do. So it was really cool to be able to climb up these temples and kind of explore around. I personally climbed up the Jaguar Temple. The steps are very narrow and steep, so it was a bit of a climb, but I made it to the top and I was really proud of myself.
I made it. Top of Lamanai. I'm exhausted.
You don't realize how high up you are until you look down. All the other people on your tour are just these tiny little dots in this field. The high temple is the most impressive. They don't let you climb up the face of it anymore. There is a stair that you can climb up to get to a railing. I did not do that. The Jaguar Temple was enough climbing for me. The other one was pretty from the ground. At one point, we hear this unearthly roar from the jungle around us. I'm like, is that a jaguar? Are we about to get attacked by a jaguar? And Colin's like, no. Those are the monkeys, howler monkeys. They hang out in the trees all around the archaeological site, and we saw a handful of them while we were traipsing around. They look kind of unassuming, but when they start fighting over something, they howl. And they sound like roaring lions. The last site we visited was the Mask Temple. The Mask Temple has several faces carved into the side of it, and the archaeologists have gone in and covered the faces with plaster to preserve them. It's all very impressive how they were able to carve all this. There's some original stelae, there's ancient carvings. A lot of it is really, really well preserved. And there's also ruins of ancient houses that are in that vicinity with these temples as well. And while we were there, Colin kept pointing out all of these hills. This whole area, he said, is not a hilly area. So when you see a big hill like that, it's actually a ruin that hasn't yet been excavated. We had some time and there were some other tours in the area, so Colin detoured us to the Lamanai sugar mill. The mill was built by the British in the 1860s, and African slaves were brought in to run the mill. However, all the slaves ended up escaping, so the mill was never actually used. And the descendants of these escaped slaves still live in this area today. At the end of our tour, Colin treated us to a delicious picnic lunch of chicken, rice and beans, coleslaw, and plantains. Earlier in the day, we'd stopped at a roadside fruit market, and David, our guide, had bought us this huge avocado to go with our lunch. It was the most delicious avocado I've ever had in my life, fresh off of whatever an avocado grows on. It was rich and creamy and really flavorful. That's the best way I have to describe it. We were all just like, how is this avocado so much better? After lunch, we had a few minutes to check out some of the local souvenir sellers before we got back on the boat and headed back to Orange Walk. Orange Walk was originally named because of the orange growing industry in the area. However, sugarcane has become a more prevalent crop in the area, so now the town has two names, Orange Walk and Sugartown. We got settled into our hotel in Orange Walk and then headed to Maracas Bar and Grill for dinner. I was told lobster was in season, so I decided to get a lobster quesadilla. It was actually really good. Though the Mayan Empire is long gone, the Mayan people do still exist, primarily in the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico, parts of Guatemala, and Belize. Today, places like the San Antonio Women's Co-op work to keep Mayan traditions alive. This group of women work to preserve traditional Mayan arts, crafts, and cooking techniques. And our next adventure in Belize was a Mayan tortilla making class. We each had the opportunity to try grinding corn in a traditional Mayan stone metate, and we each got to flatten our own little tortilla, which is a lot harder than it looks. We're watching all of our tortillas on the griddle, and David comes over, he's like, hey, who made the square-shaped tortilla? It was me. It was mine. Said it was not easy to keep that thing flat. We got to eat the tortillas that we had made with a little bit of coconut oil and some salt, which was very good. I highly recommend on a corn tortilla. If you have the opportunity to take a Mayan cooking class with these ladies at the San Antonio Women's Co-op, I highly recommend it. It ended up being one of the highlights of my trip. After the cooking class, we were treated to a traditional Mayan lunch of chicken, beans, and chaya, which is a Belizean spinach, and of course, more fried plantains. We then headed to our next hotel in San Ignacio. San Ignacio is a twin city with Santa Elena, and the two are connected by the only suspension bridge in Belize. This is also where our guide David and his family live, and we actually met his family at one point. We checked into our hotel, the Midas Resort, and had some time to relax in the hotel pool before heading to dinner at the Gully Grill. And then we all turned in early because we had a super early start the next day for our big day trip to Guatemala.
Bright and early morning today because we're heading off to Tikal today.
We left for the Guatemalan border around 6 a.m. Guatemala requires you to have a Guatemalan guide while visiting the country. So after we crossed the border, we stopped to pick up our Guatemalan guide, Luis. We then stopped in a village for a Guatemalan breakfast before heading to the main attraction of the day, Tikal. Tikal is a UNESCO World Heritage Site in Guatemala and was once one of the most powerful and influential urban centers in Mayan civilization. The site was also used for a 3-second clip in the very first Star Wars movie, and you can find pictures of George Lucas perched on the side of Temple 4 with his camera all over the internet, which was also around the same time that my grandmother got to climb up the Temple of the Great Jaguar. But I digress. The site is huge and contains the ruins of what was once a Mayan city, which was all abandoned by about the 2nd century AD. Spanish conquistador Hernan Cortez passed within a few kilometers of the site during his conquest of the Americas in 1525, but never actually found it. There's an account from 1696 of a Spanish friar who had gotten lost and stumbled upon some ruins that might have been Tikal, but nobody really knows for sure. Even though the site was all but lost to time and memory and thankfully never found by the Spaniards, the locals never really forgot about it, and they even led a Guatemalan expedition to the site in the 1850s. Today, Tikal is one of Guatemala's major tourist attractions and even appears on their money. There are ruins of ancient Mayan houses, there are ruins of many temples. You don't actually get to climb up the face of the temples anymore. You can climb up these stairs to this ramp that's on the ruins, and you can kind of be close to the ruins without actually like damaging the ruins or walking on the ruins. I climbed up Temple 2 and Temple 4, and it was well worth it. The view was spectacular. Everyone else climbed up the last temple together. I did not climb up the last temple. By then I was just like very worn out. It was a lot of climbing. At one of the temples we climbed, there was a kid ahead of me who was counting the stairs as we were climbing, and I was just like, no, I don't want to know how many stairs there are. I hurt. After our fun 4 hours in Tikal and some souvenir shopping at the site, we went to a traditional Guatemalan restaurant for a traditional Guatemalan meal. Beans and rice are really popular in this region. Plantains are very popular. So it was a very similar meal to what we'd already had in Belize.
And that was my day in Guatemala.
After our fun but exhausting day trip to Guatemala to visit Tikal, we had a free day in San Ignacio. Several of the girls in our tour decided to go to the ATV cave, which is a really interesting site where you climb through this really intricate cave system where you see all the ancient remains of these sacrifice victims deep in this cave. But after all the climbing around we'd done at Tikal, some of us just really wanted to have a relaxing day. So we signed up for a half-day cave tubing experience at Nohochchin. Nohochchin is another cave network that was also utilized for human sacrifices during the Mayan civilization. Today, visitors can take a nice relaxing trip through the cave network in a giant inner tube. All the inner tubes are tied together, and the guide actually swims ahead of you and pulls all of the inner tubes along on a giant rope. So you feel a little bit lazy, but it is very relaxing. Everyone has to wear these helmets with these headlamps in case of falling rocks, but you can also see what's going on in there. It was just the 3 of us from the Intrepid tour on this particular outing. There was another group of like 20 people ahead of us, so our guide actually took a few detours and stopped a few places to let them get farther ahead of us so we could enjoy the cave at our own leisure. At one point, we got out of our inner tubes and kind of pulled them up on the shore, and we walked over all of these rocks to this point where you can actually jump into this natural pool that's in the middle of this cave. We spent some time jumping into the water, swimming around, exploring through this little tiny cave system, which was a little terrifying, but it was fun. Altogether, we were in the cave for about 45 minutes, and then we spent the next 10 minutes or so drifting down the river back to the starting point. It was a really nice, relaxing day. It was a lot of fun, and being in the cool, fresh water was really relaxing after all the climbing around and the heat and everything. If you're in San Ignacio and have the opportunity fee to do this. I highly recommend checking it out. At the end of the tour, we were treated to another Belizean lunch before we headed back to our hotel, and then met up with the rest of our group to go to dinner at the Guava Limb. At this point, because of all of the delicious deep-fried food I'd been eating throughout this trip, I thought I was having really bad heartburn. I could not get rid of it. I love trying food in the different countries I visit, so I was like, I really want the heartburn to go away so I can just enjoy the food. It ended up not being heartburn. I woke up really early Thursday morning with a nasty chest bug. David told me that there was a flu bug going around Belize at the time, so it's very likely I just caught whatever was going around. It started in my chest, I was hacking up stuff, I was tired. The pharmacy in San Ignacio wasn't open when they were supposed to be, and so we ended up stopping at the grocery store, which happened to have a few medications over the counter, and David ended up getting me some Ambien, which did help with some of the symptoms. Adding to this, the whole trip up to this point, David had been kind of psyching us up for an all-day snorkeling tour on Key Kulker, which would have been totally fine. I was all down for snorkeling. I love me a good snorkeling tour. I had brought a snorkel with me all the way from home for this tour. The problem was, now I have this chest thing going on. I shouldn't be in the water. But while all this is going on and we're in the van heading to Belize City to get on the boat to take us to the island of Key Kulker, he's on his phone messaging the owner of the snorkel company that he uses, and is informed by this person that they will only run the tour for 6 people. And there's suspiciously 6 of us on this tour. So David is telling us we all have to agree to do the snorkeling tour or none of us can do the snorkeling tour. And I'm sitting there going, I'm about to ruin this trip for everybody because I can't go snorkeling. We got to Belize City, we went to the port and got on the ferry to Key Kulker. Key Kulker is one of over 400 islands off the coast of Belize, and it's one of the more touristy islands. There are a lot of resorts. We were on the less touristy, resorty side of it. The island is so small that there aren't really any cars to speak of. The taxis are all people with golf carts. The police have police golf carts, and there's even a tiny fire truck in case of emergencies. It's this very Caribbean island. There's a lot of little cabanas right on the ocean, eateries. So a lot of snorkeling tours, a lot of boating expeditions. I would have really enjoyed being on this island if I wasn't sick. Our last hotel, the Key Hotel, was a very nice modern hotel. The rooms were really big and really comfortable. They had these giant flat screen TVs and these giant showers. Oh my goodness, the shower was amazing. I love that shower. Only problem was, because we're on an island with delicate plumbing, we can't flush any of the toilet paper. You have to put all of your used toilet paper in the trash bin. The hotel does offer daily room service to take care of emptying the trash, which made the last couple days of my trip really interesting. Once we were settled into the hotel, David took us out on an orientation walk, which really just amounted to marching us all down to the snorkel tour outfitters to convince us to commit to this snorkeling tour. And at one point, David kind of fell back and asked me, hey, is the Ambien helping? Are you feeling any better? And I said, no, I really just want to be in bed right now. And he's like, let me call you a taxi. But while we were waiting for the golf cart taxi, we did make it to the snorkel tour outfitters. Everybody else went inside. I kind of waited outside for my taxi. And while I was waiting, the snorkel tour outfitter came out to where I was sitting and said, I know you're struggling with the heat, but hopefully you'll feel better because we need 6 people for this tour tomorrow. I know. I am fully aware. I was like, dude, I feel so sick right now. I just want to go home and sleep. So, oh yeah, just let us know in the morning. Just let us know. Hopefully you can do it because, we have to have a 6-person minimum. I got it. Yes, I know. My taxi takes me back to the hotel. I go to bed. I take a shower. Later in the afternoon, while everybody else was out exploring, David took me out to get lunch. We went to Swings, which was a little restaurant like right next door to the hotel. And the bar, instead of bar stools, they have these swings hanging from the ceiling, which is actually really creative. I honestly don't even remember what I ate at the restaurant. I know it was good. I know it was kind of spicy, and I know I couldn't finish it all because I just didn't have an appetite. Like, at this point now, my nose is a faucet. I'm hacking things out of my lungs. I may or may not be running a fever. We're not really sure at this point. And then David actually walked me down the street to a pharmacy, and I walked in, told the guy my symptoms, and he gave me a bottle of Fluobron. and said something like, that should help with the allergy symptoms. I was like, no, this isn't allergies, it's not heat stroke, I am sick. So that night, I'm taking the Fluorobron religiously. That night is when the GI problems started. I don't know if it was a side effect of the Fluorobron, I don't know if it was another symptom of what I already had, or if I picked up something from the delicious food I was eating. And I'm in a hotel where I can't flush toilet paper, so it just made the whole, it was a mess. Early on Friday morning, David messaged me and said, hey, how are you feeling? And I was like, I'm feeling a little better, but now I have GI issues. I cannot go. And everybody else still went on the snorkeling tour, even though there were only 5 of them. So I don't know what the whole thing about the 6-person minimum was. I don't know. Maybe they found a 6th person. I have no idea. But somehow they were all able to go. They had a wonderful time. I spent pretty much all day Friday sleeping, watching Netflix on the giant TV, and occasionally going out to get food. Our stay at the Key Hotel included a voucher to get breakfast at one of 2 restaurants that were right around the corner from us. So that morning I walked down to Namaste Cafe and got a little egg souffle. And then I went back around lunchtime and just got a yogurt fruit cup for lunch. And while I was coming back from getting lunch, I noticed that like all the people in these little shops and everything along the street where the hotel were had all rushed out onto the street and were kind of, taxis were paused everywhere. People were just kind of in the street watching. They had their phones out. One of the cabanas down the street was on fire, and there was this little tiny fire truck that had come up and was trying to put out the fire, and everybody was watching it. It's kind of the most exciting thing that happened. That evening, it was time for our farewell dinner, and I wanted to make sure I made it to that. I was feeling a little better at that time, and it was our final dinner, so I just sucked it up and went to dinner, listened to all of the stories about how wonderful the snorkeling tour was. And I am really glad that everybody else was still able to go on the tour and they were able to have a really great time. It sounds like a lot of fun. I'll have to go back to Tikal someday and do the tour myself. And while I was on this island surrounded by fresh fish, I was determined to try some fresh seafood. I generally don't like seafood, especially since I'm from a landlocked state, but when I'm anywhere near the ocean where there's fresh fish available, I try to get it because it's usually spectacular. So for my last dinner in Belize, it was a white fish with a basil cream sauce, and it was really good. And that was my trip to Belize with Intrepid Tours. Other than the rough beginning and the rough ending, my trip to Belize was really spectacular. And I'm really glad I was finally able to visit this beautiful country and experience the rich and unique culture. It was a little bittersweet at times thinking about how my mom and I had talked about coming here for all these years, and finally being able to take the trip to Belize, even though she wasn't here to go with me, was still very meaningful for me. Honestly, despite everything that happened the last couple days of the trip, I would go with Intrepid again. The tour gives you a really good overview of everything this country has to offer and leaves you wanting to come back for more. So if you have 8 days to explore Belize, but don't really know if you want to do it on your own, the Land of Belize tour with Intrepid is definitely the way to go. For links to the activities or lodges that I stayed in, see the description. And if you liked this video and want to see more of my trip report videos, hit that subscribe button. It's somewhere down here. Wherever it is down there, go ahead and click that. Okay, bye for now.